Okay, well, let's get started. There's a good number of us here ready to go. I'm Marie Payne, and this is Arts on the Credits virtual gallery that Sherry is showing her work in this month. We have a show every month of one of the artists, and it's there all the time, 24 hours a day, so you can go have a look at it whenever. But I wanted to also just introduce Sherry. Most of you sound like you know Sherry really well, but we'll just have a quick rundown. Oops, someone else is waiting. There we go. Sherry, as you know, is a renowned photographer, and her spectacular photography is exhibited and is collected worldwide. She has some of her photography collected by the Queen of England, by our Governor General, by David Suzuki, and just so many other dignitaries across the globe. And we're quite honored. That is Arts in the Credit is quite honored to have Sherry showing in her work this month in the gallery. As you'll see, if you haven't seen Sherry's work before, it's quite powerful and thought-provoking for sure. One of Sherry's goals, she says, is to expose more people to art and the power that art can have to change others' lives. I imagine behind these images, there are some really fascinating stories, and that's what I'm looking forward to most tonight. There's our virtual gallery, which sits on our website, artsinthecredit.ca. And you'll see this is one of Sherry's images. And if you click on it, that leads you into our gallery.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sherry, and I'd like to welcome you this evening and say a heartfelt, huge thank you for taking the time to share this evening and be here. It means a lot to me, and to share the work with each of you, my friends, fellow artists, colleagues, and we have people that are visiting today from Mexico. I just received another email just here on the side, Marie, that says there's a few people from Mexico that are going to be trying to get in a moment.
Okay.
I would like to say on the recording, welcome to Sierra Leone and welcome to the girls from Cameras from Girls in Uganda. Both parties can't be with us right now because it's 2 a.m. over in Africa, but they're looking very forward to receiving the video. It's going to be going over to Africa once this is done, Paula, and it'll be going to Mexico as well. I would like to say thank you to Marie and Paula and Thania for all of the work behind the scenes and the support and this opportunity. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. As Marie said, please ask any questions as we go along. The questions will provoke the stories and help bring out some of all of the little interesting things that happened along the way. There's 2 ways. You can either unmute and please just jump right in and ask questions, or you can put a question at the chat on the bottom, and Marie and Thania will read those questions at the end. And so I'll start here. This picture is called Life, and it is a picture from Cambodia. I'm just going to adjust my screen here. 1 second. Thank you. Sorry, my screen was just a little off there. So I had gone to Cambodia a number of years ago, and we were hiking and climbing in Angkor Wat, which is a fascinating place. If you have never been there, I would encourage everyone to go there. We spent a week in this area, and I could have spent a month. It is originally built in the first half of the 12th century as a Hindu temple, and it was continued to be built over subsequent millennia. And today it covers more than 400 acres. It's a World Heritage Site, and it's the largest religious monument in the world. And in this particular location, I was waiting for the light to hit so that the inside and the outside could be illuminated equally. You may know in photography, it's really hard to get the light adjustment in dark and in natural and interiors at the same time. And in this particular ruin, there was a great big opening in the ceiling where it had carved down, paved down. And so when the sun came over, the illumination allowed for everything to be set in the right light. This particular monument was way off the beaten path. Way off the beaten path at Angkor Wat. It was in an area that's still heavily mined, and we didn't know that.
Somebody's have to mute.
Can everybody mute?
They're watching TV or something.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
So while we were traveling, we were out and about in the grass area there and everywhere, and someone came along and said, you can't be outside past the barriers. And we asked why, and through translation explained that it was still very heavily mined. And in fact, in going around Cambodia, we saw a very large population of people that had been named by landmines and were still being named because all the mines that haven't been decommissioned or found in the area. There is a charity there. Sorry, somebody still has theirs not muted.
Can everybody check and make sure that you're muted, because we can hear background conversation and that's very difficult to follow Sherry.
I don't mute.
Thank you.
I can mute all. Okay. Should be good. You may have to unmute now, Sherry. It's unmuted everyone.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Marie. While we were on our way here, we had rented some motorcycles, and they had come with a driver, and the motorcycles were rather rudimentary in that the only way the lights would work is if the motorcycle was working and running, otherwise the lights wouldn't turn on. And on our way back, there was a very heavy torrential rainstorm, and we got mired in the muck, which meant that the wheels couldn't turn, and so our lights couldn't go on. And because this particular location was very remote, our way back was also very remote. And our driver, who knew maybe 5 words of English, tried to convince us that we were to stay there, and he was going to walk the bike into the next town to get it cleaned and cleared so he could come back and pick us up. There were 3 of us, he and 2 of us riding on this bike. And we were left in pitch black, just the 2 of us and this man that we had just met, and we had a little bit of trust that we had developed. He left, and there we were. And he said, whatever you do, don't go off of the path because it's mined. We waited and we waited and we waited. We finally decided we didn't think he was coming back, and we walked ourselves a long way into the town, and probably just under 2 hours when we made it to the town, there he was cleaning off the bike at a bike shop, trying to get it fixed for us. And it turned out to be a wonderful friendship in the making on that particular trip with this young man. You can go to the next one, Thania, if you would like. Kay is here today. Kay and I recently traveled to Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. And Myanmar is a country that has been closed to the world since 1962. And you're probably aware that it opened briefly for about 6 years, and tourism started up there. And it's now gone back into a state of civil unrest, and it's closing again. There's about 135 different major ethnic groups in Myanmar. Almost every one of them is persecuted, and it makes it very difficult to travel around in any of the ethnic areas. Kay and I had decided that we wanted to visit a number of them, and again, we traveled very remotely. One location took us, it took us several days on, again, little motorcycles going up into the mountains, where we stayed with tribes that were tattooed, or we stayed with the tribes where the women have the rings around their necks. And really interesting stories is that at the time of the kings in the 12th to 15th century, the kings had concubines. And so women were routinely, the beautiful women were routinely rounded up, kidnapped, and brought down to be part of the concubines. And so these different ethnic groups developed ways of making themselves, as they explained to us, unattractive to the kings. And one of the ways was to add the rings to the necks so that their necks would appear to be elongated and they would not be kidnapped. And the other ones were the women, a completely different tribe where they would tattoo their faces. Yet another tribe that we met would blacken their teeth. And this developed over the centuries to the point where these tribes now, this is their mark of beauty within their own indigenous groups. And it was just fascinating to stay with them and hear their stories and spend time with them. Kay and I stopped in this one indigenous village, and they offered us a meal. And the meal was rice that had been out for many hours in the heat, hot chili peppers, and chicken bones, not chicken meat, but chicken bones. Because of the poverty, the chicken bones are actually consumed by the people. And in this particular tribe, they also take the chicken bones from the chicken, the breast plate, and they hang it up in their houses whenever there is a major ceremony. So for example, the chicken that would be eaten in the equivalent of, let's say, our Easter or Thanksgiving would be taken and permanently affixed to the wall. And so you walk into these huts and it is just a massive amount of chicken bones around the house, the way we might put up photographs or curtains or something like that. In this particular photograph, we stopped in a small village in a store, and this was the matriarch of the family. And the man that was with us, showing us around, had spoken with them, and she allowed us to take this photograph of her. And I just loved the light, the way that the background was dark and her face was illuminated, and she's smoking a pipe there, actually a homemade cigar. And I just really was fascinated with Myanmar, with the culture, with the politics, with the people. And when it becomes safe again, I would highly, highly recommend going there. It's fascinating. Please ask any questions that anyone might have.
Someone, Sherry, wanted to know about Myanmar. Just closed. They put closed in brackets. What you meant by that?
Well, going back approximately 7 years, there were virtually no tourist visas. It was akin to North Korea in the world political situation, where people just couldn't go in. The ethnic groups there was genocide that was being reported by the United Nations. That's where the Rohingya are in the north. There's diamond mines in the north, and none of the tourists even today are allowed to get into that area of Myanmar. There's just a lot of political discourse, and it makes it extremely difficult. And at that time, they didn't allow tourists or very many people in at all. We were told the only people that were getting in were government officials or people that had something to do with mining. Otherwise, the country was completely closed. It would be like getting into North Korea. It remains somewhat open now, but there is reported genocide and significant civil discord going on in Myanmar right now. It's a dangerous country to enter into. Beautiful though.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
The next
Next
one,
image.
Mia, please. This is called Early Morning, and this is from Newfoundland, right here in Canada. And we had been hiking on the coastline on the east coast near Twillingate, and we took a path inwards from the ocean, and I just started photographing strands of trees. And what I started to do with this was actually one of my very first experimental abstract pieces, where I had played a little bit with some luminosity and tint, and then a lot of contrast. And then I would save it and redo it again and save it and redo it again. And this was the result of it. Newfoundland is also one of my favorite places to travel to. It's an amazing province with the topography and the views, and especially the people. It really, really is true what they say, that people will invite you into their kitchens. Perfect strangers. You go into the little villages and people just are so welcoming. And it's right here in Canada, and a number of the villages, it was very hard to even understand the English. The accent is so thick, but the people were so incredibly friendly. And the music and the cod tongues and the jigging and the fiddling, it's so prevalent in Newfoundland. And it's an adventure just to purposely get lost and go down the roads to the fishing villages. It's a wonderful province. It's one of my two favorite provinces in Canada. You may please proceed, Thania. Thank you. This is called Boy and Boat, and this was in Tonle Sap Lake in Cambodia. Several years ago, I was there. And Tonle Sap is a very interesting geographical area. It is the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia. There's over 1,000 species of fish just in this one lake, and it's one of the most productive natural fisheries in the world. More than 60 million people depend on this area just for their livelihoods, just the domino effect of living on the water to the fishing to all of the surrounding industries that would support that. During the rainy season, the lake can reach up to approximately 16,000 square kilometers in space and about 14 meters deep. During the dry season, it shrinks down to approximately 2,500 square kilometers, and it's about only 2 to 3 meters deep. And so when one goes there, it's just this amazing place of these architectural structures, rudimentary architectural structures, where all the houses are built on stilts. And the houses have to be built high enough to not go underwater when it reaches the 14 meters. And then there's bamboo ladders that everybody climbs down to get down to the ground when the water level is lower. It's a rare and very fascinating ecosystem. And unfortunately, it's now very threatened by climate change for several reasons. I believe it's Vietnam, definitely in China, and possibly in Laos, they're starting to dam the rivers that flow into the Tonle Sap River because they are experiencing climate change and drought, and they are starting to lose their water levels. But in doing so, they're causing droughts and lower water levels in Tonle Sap, and they're starting to notice a number of species going into endangered species categories. The water and sand and silt is changing, and that's where the phytomicronutrients are, which support the entire ecosystem. And with the change in that, they're losing species. And people are now starting to lose their livelihoods, and the catch that families have used to sustain themselves for centuries, families are starting to find that they can no longer support their families living here. And so a significant level of poverty is starting to set in on the area. And this was just a young boy that was crossing the lake at dusk as we were in the area. And it's if you ever get the chance, it's a fascinating area to go to, and anybody who is here who is an artist would be incredibly inspired by being in this area. We saw snakes and crocodiles. We were too eager to jump in the water there, although there were people doing so. Entire floating villages of homes exist on the water. So you've got on the outskirts the houses that are on the stilts, and in the water there are literally multiple communities. It would be like going from Mississauga to Burlington to Pickering, and they're all just floating little villages. It's fascinating. Their schools are floating. The way that they would dispose of their waste would be right into the lake. It's very different than anything we would know here. Can you please go to the next one? This is called Jubilation, and it's from Sierra Leone. I went to Sierra Leone the first time in 2007, and I've been there, I think, 4 times now. And
Wow.
Originally, I had gone there in international development work, but I fell in love with the people. They were so incredibly welcoming and loving, and just, they opened their hearts and their homes, and it just became a place that deeply touched my heart. When I went in 2007, Sierra Leone had just finished a few years before the war that they had been in. And it was it was actually the worst war that Africa had ever experienced. It was devastating. Millions of people were displaced, and tens of thousands of people were killed, and tens of thousands of children were kidnapped and tortured and put into becoming child soldiers. And this period when I was arriving was after the war, and communities were starting to come back together and to heal and to work together and to process all that had happened during the war. And when I arrived, there was not one single doctor that could treat cancer. There was no internet, there was no electricity, there was no refrigeration. Fast forward to
Wow.
today, and all of that is in place, albeit Sierra Leone is still rated by United Nations as one of the least developed countries on the planet. I still continue to work with Sierra Leone, as does Bill, who's on the call here as well. We met together while we were working in Sierra Leone, and we've embarked on some additional projects, both in art and in international development in Sierra Leone. And this was one of the villages we went into, and the children were there, and they were ready to welcome us. And we were actually playing a game. You probably remember when we were children. Let's see if I can remember. Here's the church, here's the steeple, open the doors and see all the
yes.
people. And the children were all
Yes.
doing this, and that's what I had captured here. I have so many stories of Sierra Leone. Perhaps one of my favorite ones is I was in a village one day, and Mary, who's the co-founder of CDPeace, the organization we had gone to work with, was taking us around the village, and there was such jubilation, such joy, dancing and food, and everybody was there to welcome ourselves coming into the community. And there was this young man off to the side who just looked so dejected and apart from the community. And I asked Mary about his story, who he was, and she told me his name was Mark, and Mark had been one of the children who had been kidnapped and forced to become a child soldier. And so he had been one of the people who had perpetrated some of the atrocities against the community members. And therefore there was this incredible hatred, and he was receiving death threats and things like this. He was thought to be about 16. They didn't have birth certificates. He was kidnapped at 9, so he had been living in the jungle all of these years. And through translation, because I couldn't speak Timni and he couldn't speak English, Mary introduced us, and Mary started to share some of his story. And the initial part of his story was just what I had shared with you. And Mark was off to the side, and I'd asked Mary if there was a way that we could try and bring him into the community, and he wasn't going to have any part of it. Over the course of 3 days and through cameras, Mark and I started photographing together. And at the beginning, he was very, very timid, very afraid, and there was no eye contact. At the end of 3 days, I, at times, did not know where my camera was. I had brought 3 cameras with me, and he was off photographing in the community, etc. At that point, I had asked Mark if he would, at the beginning of those 3 days, I had asked Mark if he would be able to talk about what had happened in the war, and he had said, no, he hadn't even talked to his parents about it. It was so horrific. At the end of those 3 days, he went to Mary and said, Mary, I would like to share my story with Sherry. And we went behind a hut and we sat down, and he started to talk about the war and what had happened. And the tears rolled down his eyes and ours and Mary's. And it was just, he was sobbing, and the stories he shared were just utterly heartbreaking. And I asked Mary, is there anything we could do to help Mark? And she translated, and she said, maybe send him to school. And Mark's parents had no money. And Mark asked, why would you do this for me? I feel like the devil runs through my blood, and I'm not worthy of this. We sent Mark to school. 3 years later, I went back to Sierra Leone. The little kid, and I'm sorry, I forgot one important part. He asked, what do you want from me? And I said, nothing, hon, absolutely nothing. I hesitated, and I said, maybe an act of kindness. So 3 years later, I come back, and the little kids come running up, and they're telling me, you've got to come see what Mark did, what Mark did. Well, Mark, as his act of kindness, went to the village chief and asked for some land. And the village chief told him he could clear some land in the jungle. Mark gathered the kids in the community. They planted cassava root, which is a staple there, harvested it, took it to the market, sold it. And to date, Mark has sent 29 other children to school. Mark learned English. He went to university. He is now a teacher in that community, and he is seen as a leader, and he's no longer the pariah that he once was. And the time in Sierra Leone is just filled with story after story of these heart-wrenching and heartwarming experiences that would just, they changed my life. They would change anyone's life. And we built schools there, lifelong friendships. It's just been a place of tremendous amount of life-changing memories. Bill and I will be working on a book about Sierra Leone in the coming future as well. And there'll be an upcoming exhibition in April that will include a huge segment of stories from Sierra Leone.
Oh, wonderful.
Does anybody have any questions about Sierra Leone?
Well, Christina had, oh no, I've lost it. Hang on. She had a question about the photography. Because she's a photographer. I love this photo. Can you provide any technical info on it?
Certainly. Christina, I was on aperture priority. I have softened the edges a little bit. I focused on the center. I don't have my camera settings in front of me to tell you what the aperture setting was, but it would have been set probably at about f8. And it was originally a color photo that I turned into black and white.
Ah,
And
she mentioned the Gap shirt, the Gap t-shirt that the one little fellow has on.
Yes, so a lot of churches and fundraising efforts will gather clothing and medical supplies here in North America and send them over. And they will end up on the streets and in the villages of Sierra Leone.
Mhm.
As I talk about the stories, I know that many of us as artists find our inspiration in so many different ways. And for me, there are two main ways. One is to go into nature, which grounds me. It's a place that my mom and my dad exposed us to when we were so young and through so many years. And the other place is through humanity. And as I tell you the stories, they are human stories, and they're stories that have left an indelible mark upon my soul, but they are the inspiration behind these pieces of art, behind these photographs. They are what
Yes,
inspired me.
Amina has it on top of this question, Christina's. How do you deal with ethics in photography, especially when photographing communities in Africa that have gone under warlike conditions?
I missed the first part of the question, Marie. I apologize.
Oh, sorry. On top of Christina's question, how do you deal with ethics in photography?
It's an excellent question. Personally, I feel that it's important that if I am photographing anything outside of editorial, because those have different legal ramifications, it's important to me that I have permission. And so the ethics are multi-leveled for me. If I'm in a situation like this, I have been introduced and become a part of the community, and I've been pre-given the permission to photograph. When I am working with First Nations up north in remote territories, the chief gives us permission to photograph in the community, but a next layer of that is the individuals still have to be comfortable, still have to allow me to photograph them. And something that I often do is I have extra cameras with me, and when I'm there to photograph, I often find that if somebody is also photographing with me, we're telling the story from a different perspective, mine as the observer and theirs as the person that's living in that experience. And that opens up so many doors to so many ways of being able to be with the people that I'm with, and just how they open up to the story and share their lives and allow themselves to be photographed. When I come home, if there's anything, Amina, that I personally think is ethically, if it doesn't sit well with me on a human level, I won't use that photograph, even though I may have permission to use it.
Thank you. Next one. Now, this is delightful.
Thank you. This was one of my very first, the very first year that I was photographing digitally. And I was in India, and I loved the color in this, and I loved the photograph. And this woman was very timid and shy, yet engaging, and she allowed us to photograph herself. And I just really liked the interplay of she against the blue background and the color of the clothing that she was wearing. I found India to be one of the most fascinating places to photograph, to be artistically inspired. There's so many nuances of color and culture and food and sights and smell and adversity. It's a wonderful place to be inspired as an artist.
Next one, Thania, please.
Thank you, Thania. This is Whisperings, and I was in Yellowstone National Park, and we were experimenting with our cameras. And so what I would do here, this is a strand of trees, and I slowed my shutter speed down significantly, and I would take my camera and I would move it at different speeds up and down. And depending on the light level that was hitting the camera, the amount of movement or blur would change. And this is the result of that motion study in Yellowstone.
Really interesting.
Thank you, Ray.
Next one, Tanya.
First Nations elders. I was up in Nibinamik First Nation, which is in the far north here in Ontario. And I was doing photo stories with the community, photo voice, as well as photographing the community myself. And part of what was happening while we were there was a youth elder retreat where the elders in the community were taking the youth into the bush and teaching them traditional skills. And it was fascinating to be invited to go out and be a part of that. And this was one of the elders, and she was teaching medicine bag creation and weaving and dream catchers as well. But while we were there, there was trapping and hunting and a lot of different traditional things were being taught. This community has about 400 people. The majority of the community traps, hunts, and they fish for their food source. Most of the dwellings in this community, unlike most of the other First Nations communities I've traveled to in Canada, live in log homes, wood structures. And unfortunately, like almost all of the communities, the housing situation is very difficult. They are third world conditions. They're very similar to what I've experienced in Africa. The drinking water is contaminated, drinking water advisories. But in the midst of all of this, there is such a love of culture and community, and the people are really there for each other. And this photograph just represents the elders that I came into contact and the culture.
Beautiful, those hands.
Thank you.
Next one, Tanya. Oh, that is what is behind you, is it not?
That is right, Marie. This is a thrill, and this was taken in Southern Ontario. And it was a few years ago when we had that flash freezing, the rare hoarfrost. And I woke up one morning and outside was just this magical winterland. And I was excited. I felt almost like Christmas morning. And I grabbed my camera and Kathy, and off we went in the car northwest of Mississauga. And there was an orchard, apple trees, and there were berries. And the hoarfrost, which is a rare phenomenon where the vapor in the air hits something that's already frozen, and it immediately creates this crystallization around it. And that's what was happening here. And this was the result. The berries were just flash frozen onto this.
That's gorgeous.
Thank you.
And that's the color. You didn't do anything to it.
What I did with this was I bent down to try and get the muted sky in the background, so it would almost act as if it was a purposeful background. So there wasn't other trees or anything like that. It was just the clouds in the sky. I have added some contrast to this. You can see that a little bit in the darkened branches.
Yeah, okay. Very effective though.
Thank you.
Next one, Tanya.
This is called Ancient Faces, and this is another abstract which I've been experimenting with in the last year. I was in Mexico City and I was walking around, and there was this giant wall of all of these Aztec faces. And Mexico City is fascinating in that many of the ruins that were there before the Spanish colonized Mexico, parts of them are still visible. And I had taken this picture of the faces and then again played with that contrast and tinting and just saving it more contrast, saving up more contrast, and saving the image over and over again to get this effect. And by doing that, it brought out the lines around the faces and some muted colors. I'm having fun with this, experimenting with these.
Mhm. Next image.
This image is untitled, and this is from India as well. We were traveling remotely in northern India up into Rajasthan and then up into the desert between India and Pakistan. And it is incredibly fascinating in India. It's just a dichotomy of so many contrasts, and I just am fascinated by the social system, the people, the color, the homes, the villages, the religious tonality in the country. And this was a man who had several wives in tow behind him. And we were in a small village, and he allowed me to take several photographs of him. And this was the result of it. And I love his face and the character on his face.
Christina's wondering how old he is, if you knew.
I don't, Christina. I'm sorry. I do know that he was considerably older than his several wives. I would wager that he was probably well into his 60s and 70s, or maybe early 70s.
Mhm. Yeah, he does look older. She says, wow, he looks older. Yeah.
He was very gracious in allowing himself to be photographed.
Mhm. Yes, fascinating face.
As I mentioned earlier, the pieces of humanity are very much a part of my inspiration when I photograph, when I create art. And over the years, when I look back on my work, there seems to be a common theme of people that emerges from the different places that I've been to. And he's representative of one of those places.
Mhm. Mina says you need to count the lines on his face to know how old he is.
Like a tree.
Okay. Laura says there's a look of trust in his eyes, in all the, just a minute, I closed it, in all the images that you photograph. They're just trusting you,
Thank you
with
for
their image.
Sorry, Marie. Thank you for that comment. It is something that I try to create when I'm photographing. There were times when we were in India where people would just turn away and not allow themselves to be photographed. So there is a relationship, albeit sometimes very short, that develops so that that trust can be there. Because otherwise, what I never want to be is a tourist just grabbing a piece of somebody that doesn't feel ethical or kind to me. So it's important to have a reciprocity of something going on in the moment.
Next image, Tanya.
This is called Flowing, and it is also from Yellowstone National Park. I'm not sure how many of you may have heard of Grand Prismatic Hot Springs. It's a surreal, wondrous, fantastical place in Yellowstone. It's an area where the geological features happen to be the third largest in the world, and they are visible from space. And this is an area where water was erupting from way down in the Earth's core. And the water erupts and flows out of the depths of the Earth, I believe at about 160 degrees Celsius. And what ends up happening is, 160 degrees Fahrenheit. What ends up happening is as the water erupts up from the center of the Earth and flows out and starts to cool as it goes out, there are these bands of temperature. And in these bands of temperature are microorganisms and different single cell pieces of existence. And they can only live in that very specific temperature, and therefore in that only specific band of temperature. And they create these pieces of light and color. And so what I'm photographing there is the water as it's running out of one of the eruptions, and all of the different multi-organisms that are living in communities there, single cell. And there's thousands of them there.
Wow.
I would recommend anybody who can get to Yellowstone to go. It's intriguing. It's visually intriguing.
Oh, next one, Tanya.
This is called Nautical Moments. And this was in San Francisco. And a heavy fog was rolling in, and there was actually particulate in the air that hung. It hung heavy in the air. And that was the picture from that day on the beach down at the city, in the city.
Wow. That is thick fog.
It is, and it disseminated that color from the light was hitting the top of the bridge, and then it was reflecting into the clouds.
And you just happened to be there.
Yes. But from all of the photographs that I saw online before I went, and looking at the Golden Gate Bridge, there is no shortage of opportunity. The fog rolls in almost daily, and it's just a very beautiful place to photograph.
And next image, Tanya. Oh.
I have not titled this one yet, and this was my favorite day in Cuba. Kay and I went to Cuba, and we were traveling remotely. I think we spent literally a couple of hours on a beach, and that was for the purpose of snorkeling and scuba diving. And Kay and I were walking one day down this very remote road, and this man was fixing a fence. He had a torn shirt, his pants didn't fit properly, and he stopped us and he said hello. And Kay is fluent in Spanish, and I speak enough to get by, and we started speaking with the family, and they invited us to their farm, which was just up the road. And this was the mother of the man who had invited us. They had nothing, literally nothing. Their house, you can see, would leak during the rain. The floor was dirt. There were virtually no possessions inside, and they opened their house, their home, their family to us. They went into the field and got food to offer to us. It was just, for me, a fascinating afternoon of sharing humanity and each other. And it was just delightful, and it really touched my heart. And if I ever go back to Cuba, I want to find this family and go spend more time with them. I love the day we spent here. And they allowed us to photograph them for hours. We had a lot of fun together.
So you have a couple of comments on this one. Oh, let me find them again. I saw them. Oh, Christina said when she saw the image, her first thought was gratitude. And yeah, and Connie said all of these are so rich, from storylines, experiences to the compositions. The captures of people are absolutely my favorite, Sherry. And that's Connie Munson.
Connie, thank you for the kindness and the honor of those comments. I appreciate it very much. And Christina, yes, gratitude is something that was very much expressed that day. I think from the family and from Kay and myself, just because of the interaction and the reciprocity that occurred on such a human level that day.
Mm-hmm. Oh, next image.
This is called Contemplation. It's from India. And I just really like the starkness of this structure with this wall that had been left there. And we were in, again, a remote village. And this was a ruin. Children had been playing on the outside of it, but when I ventured inside to explore it, there was that hole just sitting there. And I like the isolation and the sentiment of what this said to me.
Mm-hmm.
I very much was attracted to the texture and the simplicity of the space.
Oh, Mina was asking where this was in India.
Mina, we were just north of Udaipur at this point. Very interesting and naive on my part. When I first went to India, I had purchased the travel guide books and was determined I was going to travel remotely, and I was going to go by train and rent a car. Unbeknownst to me, cars come with drivers. You can't rent a car without a driver. And so the driver ensured our safety and took us to all of these amazing places and got us into places we might not have been able to get into because of not understanding the culture or the language. We had two different drivers, were very helpful in opening the experience to us in India.
Next image, Tanya.
This is called Solitude, and this is one of my other favorite places in the world. This is Chesterman Beach in Tofino in British Columbia. Chesterman Beach is probably about 2.5 kilometers outside of Tofino, and it is nestled on the outskirts of the Pacific Rim National Park. It's hugged by the rainforest on one side and the serene beauty of the Pacific Ocean in front of you. It's as far as you can see, and it's one of the only places in the world, supposedly, where one can see the sunset, the sunrise, and the moon visible during the same day, on this one beach. It's a place that I feel very spiritual. And every time I've gone, and I try to go every year, although during COVID I couldn't get there, the landscape on this beach is forever changing. The tides, the sunsets, the sunrises, it's just such an inspirational, spiritual place to be. I get up early in the morning before everybody else gets up. Sometimes there's been wolves on the beach, and I went out one time with a big knife because I was told the wolves were out there, but I wanted to get the sunrise. Other times there's surfing competitions, but for the most part, it's a fairly remote feeling beach because of the size of the beach.
Wow. Christine is wondering how long you've been photographing.
Christina, I received my first camera in grade 13, a graduation gift from grade 13 from my parents. And I started taking some photographs then, but my camera more or less ended up in the drawer except for vacations. Fast track to, oh my goodness, I think it was 2006 or so. And I went down the Amazon, went to the Amazon River with my friend Susan, who I think is on this gallery exhibition tonight. And we went to briefly stay with an indigenous tribe that was thought to be extinct until the 1970s. when they reemerged from the Amazon, and we were invited to go and stay with them for the purpose of learning their ways so that we could come back out and share with the world what our consumerism does to the planet and to people in other parts of the world. And we were not allowed to photograph when we were in that community because they felt that we were taking a piece of them, but also we had been brought into sacred ceremony with the community. And I was in such awe of the experience that I had to start photographing again. And it was a catalyst to begin exploring more of humanity, more of the environment, and more of our commonalities here in the world.
Granny says 1 year old. That
Pardon?
Claire and Sherry, it says, Granny says 1 year old. You did something that you were 1? Is that what that means? I don't know. Oh, I see 10. Then she's typed in 10. It was a correction. The first 1 year was wrong. She meant 10 years.
10 years
when you
old. Oh,
started.
I think she's talking about when I was very young. I had a paper route in Montreal, and I can't remember why, but I won a prize, and the prize was a Polaroid camera. And yes, I did take some pictures back when I was 10. That is correct. Yes. Thank you for that memory.
Next image, Tanya.
And this is the second last image. There's, for some reason, a green line on there. I'm not sure what that is. But this is entitled Pink Tulip. It is a pink tulip. I was in my parents' backyard with my mom and dad, and they had a vast planting of tulips. And it was a bright sunny day, and I laid down on the ground and looked straight up at the underside of the tulip and took this. And the pink in the background is all the other tulips being blurred by the strong sun filtering through them. This picture has more significance to me now. It's always been a favorite of mine because it came from time with my mom and dad. My dad passed just a year ago, and so now this is very special to me because he was there with me.
So of course, yes, it would have. And so next one, Tanya.
And there's that green line again. I'm not sure what it is. It seems to be following the images.
Yeah,
I apologize for that on the screen, folks. This is the last image. This is called Sacred Waters. And I was up in Mishkigogama First Nations up in Northern Ontario. It's an Ojibwe First Nations community of approximately 900 people. And it is the last community on the last most northerly road in Northern Ontario. It's about 500 kilometers northwest of Thunder Bay. And we were there. I was there with Ryerson University. And the beauty of a number of these trips is I may be there in the capacity of international development or photo voice or something like that, but there was always the opportunity to create art, to be out there and be with people and co-create or be out on my own. And this was early morning, and I'm standing, which you can't see in the photograph, is there is a sacred fire pit right in front of me that is burned, and the 7 stones go into that. And it was just this beautiful, beautiful morning after an experience of being in the sweat lodge and eating goose and fishing and learning from the First Nations. And they were sharing their lives with us and their stories. And it was just very representational of my time there. I've been to probably about 7 remote First Nations communities in Northern Canada for the purpose of creating art and photographing.
Mhm. Christina says she's been following along and browsing through your website at the same time. And she wanted to say that your natural forte is people, which she herself finds very hard to photograph. But you definitely capture their true essence.
Christina, thank you for those comments and for the kindness of your thought. I very much appreciate them. Each of those interactions with the people does leave a piece of that interaction within me. That's probably why they're prominent, and certain photographs are prominent in my work.
And I believe we've come to the end.
May I open it up for questions?
Okay, let's stop the screen share and you can put on your videos again.
So I noticed that Myra from Mexico has joined in.
Wow,
Hello,
welcome.
Myra. And Lucy from Mexico is here. Murray from Manitoba is here.
Oh, you
Hi,
pulled
Paul.
in the world here, Sherry.
And we have British Columbia.
That's wonderful. That's the good thing about Zoom and the internet. That's one great thing, that things like this can happen.
Would anybody have any questions?
Let's see if we've missed anything. Mina says, thank you very much for this beautiful display. It's been very inspiring.
Hi, Sherry. It's Christina again, me, the chatterbox on photography. Do you have any, sorry, I'm just gobbling all this up. Do you have any plans going forward as to where your next location is going to be?
I do. First of all, I'd like to say thank you, Mina, for your comments. I appreciate those. And thank you, Christina, for your question. I will travel anywhere, anytime, any chance that I get. It slowed down during COVID. In fact, it came to a stop during COVID. But I am wanting to travel as much as I can, Christina. I leave on Wednesday for Mexico. It's not related to photography, but I will find opportunities to do so. I will be going to Tofino in September or October, and Portugal will either be happening in the late fall or the early spring. I hope to do some more First Nations work, but those are the areas that I will be traveling to in the immediate future. And then after that, I'm looking at Croatia and back down to Mexico. And then Bill and I are hoping to get back at some point to Sierra Leone as well. And
Wow.
Amina, who is on this call, is the founder of an organization called Cameras for Girls. And it's an amazing organization that works with university students, female students who cannot get jobs because of their gender. She teaches them how to use cameras, and they are now able to support their families and have paying jobs, etc. And I'm hoping to get over to Uganda with Amina as well.
Wow. Wow. Mary Go, excuse me, Mary Go, who's a potter that shows at Arts and the Credit events. Oh, now the comments disappeared. Hang on. She says it's wonderful. This evening's event was a wonderful way to visit the gallery, Sherry. Such great stories behind each piece.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and your sentiment. I appreciate that.
Sherry, you mentioned going to Tofino. Have you considered doing some photographs in Eucalypt? Because it's kind of quirky. I kind of got a kick out of Eucalypt when I was there.
I very much enjoy Eucalypt as well, and the Wild Pacific Coast, and Yuki Dog's little hole in the wall restaurant. And yes, I do enjoy it out there as well. I have photographed there, and I do intend on doing more.
Murray says, wonderful exhibit. You get them up so I can read them for you. Where's Murray's gone? Wonderful exhibit. Thank you for sharing. I think you took my photo with your brother in my Corvette with that first camera your parents gave you. I still have it.
I remember the photo, yes, in the 1970s when men wore their shorts as tight as we as women do now. Yes, I have that picture of you in those shorts, Murray.
Wow. And Lucy said, you made us travel with your photos and very happy to be here and be your friend and your fan.
Lucy, gracias mucho. Lo agradezco mucho. I very much appreciate those comments, Lucy. Thank you.
Any other comments tonight before I let Sherry go? You know, thank you so much, Sherry, for taking this evening to share all the stories. It just is so much more meaningful when we hear some of the background behind the images that you have shown and shared with us. It just makes it that much more special. So thank you. And thank everyone for coming out tonight and being with us and supporting Sherry and all her work. And anytime you like, you can go have another look at your leisure through the gallery. It's there till the end of this month.